I have previously made a couple videos about the Nintendo 3DS, but I've never made a definitive list of games you should play. And while most videos like that are filled with these same games over and over, my list is going to be a little bit different. So with that said, today we're going to check out a bunch of 3DS games that you probably haven't seen before and you should consider trying. So the first game at number 1 is Andro Dunos 2. The 3DS is not very well known when it comes to shoot 'em ups because there really aren't that many, especially when you consider that most end up never having a physical release, so when Dunos 2 came out physically, it caught a lot of people off guard, mainly because the shooter had previously only ever come out on the Neo Geo in 1992, and most people had long forgotten about the game, making this release fairly unique considering how well it takes advantage of the handheld's 3D display. Now I did put this one first on the list because it's not perfect, and the reason for that is due to the game's performance, as it tends to have some frame rate problems that jump up and down. Even with that being so, I was able to look past that as the game is still a lot of fun and the 3D graphics and music were enough to keep me playing, so overall if you like shoot 'em ups and you want a game that utilizes the 3D graphics, Andro Dunos 2 is a good choice. And so in at number 2 on this list is Go Kokopolo. Now I went with the first game in the series because I personally feel like it's a good starting point for someone new. In Kokopolo, you play as an evil cat who has to scratch innocent animals and lead them to hungry plants. That is about the most straightforward explanation I can give, but put simply, you want to get a bunch of enemies to follow you and create the longest chain possible. It's a weird game and it definitely totes the line between being a platformer and a puzzler, which is fairly unique. Overall, Go Kokopolo is a fun game, and it's crazy to think that it started out as a DSi title that was luckily brought over to the 3DS over 10 years later. So if a chase 'em up game sounds appealing to you and you want something you're not going to find anywhere else, consider giving this one a try. And so in at number 3 is the Sega 3D Classics collection. I really like this collection because Sega did an awesome job at implementing 3D effects and making the overall experience feel much more than just a simple re-release of classic old games. It's really cool to see a bunch of these old games brought over with updated graphics and quality controls implemented. Also, I appreciate how this collection includes games like Puyo Puyo 2, which was only ever released in Japanese arcades, but is now playable for everyone on the go. Another thing that this collection does right is when it comes to variety. Whether you like Sonic or Power Drift, you're gonna eventually land on something you like. For me, it was Galaxy Force 2 because the 3D effects make it feel like a whole new experience. Overall, this one is a solid collection of games with actual 3D functionality and proper controls, so if you enjoy those old arcade games, this is a must-own. And at number 4 we have HarmonKnight. This is a super cool game that really falls to the wayside because it never had a physical release. It was created by Game Freak, who are most well known for Pokemon and haven't made a new platformer since Drill Dozer on the GBA. HarmonKnight follows the same gameplay style that the Bit Trip series does because players automatically run but have to time their button presses with the music to either jump, attack, or dodge, which might come off as boring and unintuitive, but HarmonKnight does a solid job at throwing you off beat by increasing the difficulty the further you progress. Now it is worth mentioning that the boss fights are slightly different when it comes to the controls, as they require the use of the D-pad to match the tempo while also matching a sequence of buttons. Overall, I'd say HarmonKnight excels in its audio and visuals, while its gameplay might fall a little short for some people. Still, if you want a rhythm game that does a solid job at staying different, HarmonKnight is a title you're gonna really enjoy. And so next at number 5 is Oasis. For the longest time, this game went unnoticed as it sadly released right near the end of the 3DS's life cycle. The game was made by the creator of Secret of Mana and strongly resembles many beloved 3DS titles all combined into one. Oasis is an action RPG that focuses on using real-time combat. It also has a fair amount of puzzles and design elements that let players build up their own towns while exploring for new items. It's a large game on the 3DS and it can be fairly open-ended for those that want to explore everything. Also, the gameplay does a good job at staying fresh, as the combat and exploration don't really feel that boring even after dozens of hours of gameplay. It really sucks that Oasis released so late on the 3DS because a lot of people missed out on it, and that's pretty unfortunate considering it was never ported to the Nintendo Switch. So I'd say if you are the kind of person who enjoys role-playing games, Oasis is one that you should consider trying. And in at number 6 we've got Pac-Man Galaga Dimensions. When this released, I remember avoiding it because I fully expected the game to be bad, and I was very wrong, which sucks because I missed out on this one and only got around to it 10 years later. Pac-Man Dimensions is a collection of 6 games from the Pac-Man and Galaga franchises. Within the collection, 2 of the games featured here are exclusive to the 3DS, and those are Pac-Man Tilt and Galaga 3D Impact. Both heavily rely on the 3DS's functionalities, and they do a fairly good job at being different compared to the other games included. One of my personal favorites here is the Galaga 3D Impact game, as it stays true to what Galaga fans want. Now, because this is an early 3DS game, frame rate was a little hit or miss. I did notice that some games had a few hiccups, but again, it wasn't enough to stop me from having fun, but is still worth noting. I'd say that Pac-Man Galaga Dimensions does a good job at succeeding in what it wants to achieve, and for fans of the original arcade games, it's one that's for sure worth trying. And so in at number 7 is Little Battler's Experience. If you've ever played games like Custom Robo, this will probably look somewhat familiar, as it's clear the developers took a little inspiration from that game. LBX is a third-person robot fighting game that has a ton of RPG elements, giving players plenty of customization and choices to choose from. The heart and soul of this game is without a doubt its customizable robots and designing them to your playstyle. I personally enjoyed the gameplay, and I appreciated how in-depth you can get with the customization. But one thing I did notice that was worth pointing out is the lack of online multiplayer. While yes, the game does have local play, I could see why some people were disappointed when it initially released. Still, in 2024, the 3DS online service is dead, so really that downside doesn't matter anymore. So if you like RPG style mech games, or you simply have never tried one, Little Battler's Experience is at least worth giving a go. And so in at number 8 we've got Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. I put this game right near the end of the list because chances are most people have played it, or at the very least have heard of it. But even with that being so, it really is a game that's a must-own for anyone with a 3DS, as it's a flawless remaster with a lot of improvements in terms of the graphics and accessibility. Personally, I feel the 3DS version is the best way to play Majora's Mask, especially if you're planning on using the 3D functionality. Overall, I don't want to say much more since just about everybody knows what this game is, but put simply, if you haven't played this game on your 3DS, you really should give it a try. And so last at number 9 is Resident Evil Revelations. When I was a kid, I played the RE Revelations demo on my 3DS at least 10 times, and I was amazed at how good it played and looked. Everything from the graphics to the atmosphere was perfect, and at the time there was nothing else like it on the 3DS, well, besides Mercenaries. Resident Evil Revelations took the third-person survival horror genre and compacted it down onto the handheld. It contains a fairly lengthy story that switches between a few perspectives, and also has multiplayer raid modes, which are just better versions of what Mercenaries tried to do. Also, it's worth pointing out that the game has great 3D effects, and it includes a first-person gyroscopic aiming mode, which sounds like it would be bad, but it's actually really good. This is probably my favorite game on the 3DS, and I could talk about it for hours, but to keep things short, Resident Evil Revelations is a must-play for anyone with a 3DS system, so if you haven't tried it already, you really should. And so that concludes the list. As always, I have a giant catalog of 3DS games I'd recommend, but I try to keep these videos short. I'm still discovering new games, so if you have any recommendations, please put them down in the comments, as I always like to discover new ones to recommend. And so with all that said, I just want to say thank you for watching all the way to the end. Please subscribe if you already haven't, and I will see you fairly soon. Bye.